Thanks for joining us for another edition of Secrets from the Ancient Past and our final episode in the special Secrets from the Via Dolorosa series. 2 weeks after the resurrection of Jesus, Jesus met his disciples at the Sea of Galilee. Now, it's fairly easy to determine when this event happened, and the land provides some of the clues we need to make this determination. The resurrection happened on the first day of the week. The first day of the week is Sunday, both in ancient times and in our time. The difference between the culture Jesus knew and the one you probably know is that Sunday was a work day for all the people you know in the Bible. You see, Jewish people will rest on Shabbat, or what we call Sabbath. That's pretty much Friday afternoon, Friday evening, and all day Saturday. So, on Sunday mornings after all that rest, people were up bright and early, ready to clock in for another week of labor. 1 week after the resurrection, however, the disciples were still in Jerusalem when Jesus appears to them a second time. The first was on what we call Easter Sunday, and now 1 week later, Thomas was present. Now, if you remember, Thomas had doubted the truth of the resurrection. He had missed that first appearance of Jesus. He had good reason to doubt the resurrection. Have you ever known a person who died and then came back to life? It just doesn't happen. It seemed to him to be something too good to be true. But on the Sunday following Resurrection Sunday, 1 week later, Thomas saw Jesus with his own eyes. And he bowed before Jesus and said, "My Lord and my God." And then it was time for everyone to head back to the Galilee. Jesus had actually given early instructions for the disciples to meet him in the Galilee. But from a practical standpoint, these leaderless disciples had nothing left to do in Jerusalem. So I think they just went home. It's roughly 80 miles from Jerusalem to the southern shoreline of the Sea of Galilee. So at 20 miles a day, that's 4 hard days of hiking. I'm hoping that they caught a boat down at the southern end of the Sea of Galilee and sailed across the lake. That would have saved them the last leg of the journey, saved them a full day of hiking. But either way, that's a long trip. Now, 1 week after Thomas had seen Jesus in Jerusalem, that week given over to travel, the disciples are back in Capernaum. They needed Friday afternoon, Friday evening, and all day Saturday to rest. Shabbat came at a good time for them. But it also gave them a lot of time to think. And surely they had talked a lot with themselves about what was going to happen next. And I bet that had been really difficult for all of them. Sure, they were overjoyed that Jesus was alive. Who would not have been overjoyed at such news, at such an incredible reality? They were very close to Jesus. They spoke openly for their love that they had for their teacher. And it was even more profound because they knew what Jesus had said was going to happen and the why of why he said he was going to die. But the problem was obvious. All of these disciples had let Jesus down. The man they loved, they all ran away. They all betrayed him. Judas Iscariot was so filled with remorse at what he had done, he took his own life. I've always thought it's a wonder none of the others did the same thing. Now, 2 weeks have passed. What are they going to do? They all knew the long-term ramifications of betraying a rabbi. They were disqualified from ever being called disciples of Jesus. According to John chapter 21, Simon Peter is the first to offer an idea. "I'm going fishing," he said. Immediately, 6 others, including Thomas, said they wanted to join him. They had been fishermen before, many of them had. They had come, many of them had, from fishing families. They certainly were in a fishing community. So, you can't fish for Jesus, can't fish for men, maybe you can find a way to fish for fish again. They went out on the lake early in the very earliest hours of the day when it's very dark and when the fishing is best on the lake, but they caught nothing at all. I think it's ironic. I mean, it's a beautiful picture. They're in the same place, in the same position, really, as when Jesus had first called them 3 years earlier. Remember that encounter? Jesus had given them a miraculous catch of fish, and they had literally felt that miracle in their fingers, in their arms, in their shoulders, in their backs. And they had never forgotten the feel of that miracle. And they left everything that day to follow Jesus. But boy, had they failed at following. So here they were in their boats again. We filmed a short segment on the shoreline of the Sea of Galilee some years back in 2012. And I can't tell you exactly where this encounter between Jesus and his disciples happened, but where we were on that particular morning, we were very, very close to where the most important breakfast in the Bible took place. Now think about it. This is where it had all begun. About 3 years before, Jesus had come along the shoreline, found some fishermen, and said, "Follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men." They were fishing for fish. Jesus was preparing breakfast alongside the shore. It was early in the morning. They couldn't recognize him. They didn't know who it was. He calls out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" They said no. They'd been fishing all night. They hadn't caught a thing. "Well, throw your nets on the right side of the boat and you will find some." That must have sounded familiar. I think they expected the nets to be full as soon as they dropped them in the water. And they were. They couldn't even bring the nets into the boat. Simon Peter couldn't wait. He came ashore. They all had a time of reconciliation around breakfast, of all things. It was fellowship. And yet I can hear the questions, even if they were never voiced. "Thomas, are you through doubting? Nathaniel, do you finally think that if God so chooses, he could bring something good out of Nazareth? And what about you, Simon Peter? Do you really love me more than these? Do you love me? Do you love me, Simon?" He asked him 3 times, and it hurt. It hurt Simon deeply because he had denied 3 times. The leader of the disciples, the man who had promised with an oath that he would never run away from his rabbi, that he would die for Jesus if necessary, well, he had run just like the rest of them. And so after the resurrection, he knew, they all knew, they were now disqualified to be disciples. I think a lot of us have felt disqualified from time to time. We've done something, or maybe a lot of somethings, that have taken us out of, I don't know, the circle of grace. We feel that way. If you have ever felt that way, I want you to remember this scene on the Sea of Galilee, because Jesus came here to them and pursued them again, asked them again, "Would you follow me?" And you know what? They did. They took that invitation of grace and they never ran again. Some of them suffered greatly. In fact, they all suffered. Some of them would go to prison. Some of them would lose property. They would go to distant lands. In fact, church history and tradition tells us almost all of them were executed for their faith. But now they had finally found something in this grace that was worth dying for. And once they found something worth dying for, they found something worth living for. This is the power of Easter, the power of the resurrection. It's not simply that Jesus was raised from the dead. Oh, that's the story we've told for centuries. It's the story of all history. The power, though, that affects us personally is this invitation to follow again. Take the invitation of grace. Live like that grace makes a difference. And you'll know the same power these men found on that beach that morning. You know, I am struck by 2 things. First, that's a pretty young version of me in that video. But second, that's a powerful lesson that never gets old. Jesus loved his disciples enough to pursue them, to come to where they were. Oh, they had been in Jerusalem. That's the last place they saw Jesus. Now they were 100 miles away at the Sea of Galilee. They had no hope of seeing Jesus. They did not deserve to see him, certainly did not deserve to ever follow him again. And yet Jesus came to them and offered them another opportunity to be a part of what he was doing. That is the power of grace. Call it amazing grace. Call it a second chance of grace. Call it whatever you need to call it, because you may need that kind of grace today. Can I tell you something? Jesus will never tire of finding you where you are and offering you his grace. Listen, thank you for being with us today, for joining me for another episode of Secrets from the Ancient Past. And thank you especially for joining us over these last few weeks as we've looked at the secrets from the Via Dolorosa. I hope you've enjoyed that series. I hope you'll also join us next week as we continue to look at how the land of the Bible can unfold secrets that are hidden in plain sight for these passages we know so well. And most of all, I hope you'll continue to walk in the grace of our resurrected Savior. Thanks for joining us. I'm Andy Cook.